Next up, we play host to Chelsea at the Olympic Stadium. Kick-off on Wednesday evening is 8:15 p.m. You may find that your commentary is interrupted in the early stages by the final cycle of the dishwasher process, though if Jamie Carragher is on duty that would be no bad thing, of course. So, Chelsea then. Already unpopular due to their support, which seems to be full of 12-year-olds who claim to have been about since the days of Chopper Harris, they added to the number of reasons to dislike them last week by handing the league title to PGMO Liverpool on a plate the other night. OK, the trophy had already been well and truly paid for, but for most right-thinking people, we would have liked the day of reckoning to have been delayed by a few matches at least. Since the restart, they've played 3 times, beating Villa away 2-1 and winning by the same score against next season's champions, Manchester City. After that, they managed to squeeze in an FA Cup quarter-final, winning 1-0 up at Leicester, all of which has left them in 4th place in the league, 2 points clear of Wolves at the time of writing, over whom they've got a game in hand thanks to their cup run. The post-lockdown crowd, if one can refer to it as that, has been short at Stamford Bridge to the tune of 1 in recent weeks. Like most supporters who first became interested in the club back in 2003, Roman Abramovich has been missing in action of late. This stems from a few issues with his visa in the light of strained Anglo-Russian relations, following a spot of tourism undertaken by a couple of Putin's finest in Salisbury a while back. Abramovich had already tried to take out Swiss citizenship a couple of years prior to the date that Novichok became a household name, but he'd been turned down on the grounds that he had, quote, contacts with criminal organisations and that his assets were, quote, at least partly of illegal origin. Meanwhile, up in Newcastle, supporters must be wondering what is taking the fit and proper authorities quite so long to decide that Saudi Arabia's human rights record is just a minor local affair. Daisy, the socially bubbled personal assistant with a beautiful smile, tells me that little business was done during the transfer window. A couple of Scandinavian youngsters apart, there were no incomings. They did loan out a couple more players, of course, they always do. The highest profile of these were the ironically named Danny Drinkwater, who has swapped not playing for Burnley for not playing for Aston Villa, and former Hammers loan player Victor Moses, who is trying to go for the record of the most loan sides ever, having swapped the early season heat of Fenerbahce in Turkey for the summer sun of Milan, where he's currently plying his trade with Inter. Top scorer so far this season is Tammy Abraham, who's got 13 in the league. Tammy wasn't the name he gave to the traffic police in Bristol a couple of years ago, mind. Oh no, he was wise enough to give his real name, which was Kevin. Had that been the name on his full licence, all would have been well. Only he didn't actually have a full licence, or insurance. Another depressing example of how some professional footballers sometimes view the law of the land as something to be treated with the same respect as, say, the law on diving. Over the course of the season, they have swapped about a bit between the sticks, where, prior to lockdown, Willie Caballero had a few starts. However, they've gone with Arrizabalaga since the restart. He is, of course, unusual amongst players in that he has his occupation on the back of his shirt, in the form of the word keeper. It was something Chelsea wanted to try a few years back with John Terry. However, the printer refused to print the appropriate, if rather obscene, 4-letter word that would have been more apt. It wasn't a problem. The word Terry is sufficient to tell everybody what they need to know. In midfield, we are likely to see Declan Rice's best mate, Mason Mount, which, when I was a kid, was a small hillock just outside Winchester. Mount got a ticking off from the club during the recent, more stringent lockdown rules for meeting up with Mr. Rice and a few friends for a kickabout a few weeks ago. We saw the usual stuff about reminding the player of his responsibilities. Still, at least it was just an innocent kickabout, which, as far as I was aware, did not involve the hiring of a couple of professional ladies to make up the numbers. There's really not an awful lot to say about them at this time. There's no injuries to first-team regulars to consider, though one might expect a spot of squad rotation, given that this will be their 3rd match in a relatively short period of time. So I will move on to the wild and wacky world of association football then. Sadly and predictably, given that the conclusion had been foregone due to the involvement of PGMOL in the decision-making process, Liverpool were finally given the Premier League that was set up for their benefit in the first place, having spent over £1 billion in the process. Equally predictably, the BBC went into some sort of nauseating eulogy mode, somehow omitting to mention both the illegal nature of their supporters' subsequent celebrations and the violent nature that those celebrations took. I guess if you've got a club that breaks all the rules, you must think you've got carte blanche to do that yourselves. Meanwhile, The club came out with a statement to the effect that the supporters' behaviour was, quote, unacceptable. Better late than never, I suppose. Let's move on to us then. As suggested, it's a measure of how bad things are that we contrive to lose to a rank Spurs side, even if it did require yet another disgraceful spot of officiating. Watching the aftermath of the goal, suddenly the VAR possible handball sign came up, followed about a nanosecond later with the all clear. If the incident was reviewed, it beggars belief that the handball was missed, and if it wasn't reviewed, well, it beggars belief that it wasn't. Amazingly, the headlines the next morning were of the Moyes may face charges type, rather than the PGMOL to investigate / dismiss dishonest / incompetent official type. Actually, what would have been better would have been FA sets up independent commission to look into English refereeing standards. But since the FA is only 157 years old, I guess we'll have to wait a while for that particular bit of common sense to occur. As predicted by this column when VAR first arrived, it doesn't work because it doesn't address the right problem. The whole point of VAR is that its whole use in this country seems to be based on the idea that refereeing errors are the result of referees missing or not seeing things. If that were the case, VAR ought to work perfectly. However, most refereeing errors in this country seem to stem from the fact that our referees are appalling. In fact, they're a laughingstock in the world in European circles. If a referee is daft enough to make a bad error on the pitch, he's just as likely to make that error when watching the same incident on the screen. Throw into the mix the fact that VAR is being used by officials to cover their mates' backsides, and, well, you get what we've got. What should be happening is that VAR should be used to assist good refereeing and expose the bad, and anyone who misses something obvious on VAR, like a goal or handball, should be forced to explain themselves and disciplinary action taken. Meanwhile, further up the pitch, when we weren't being stitched up by PGMOL, we were being stitched up by our own lack of, well, fitness and tactical nous. Again. In fact, it's a toss-up between which was more predictable. The fact that we wouldn't be able to come back from 1-0 down, or the fact that Mr. Moyes was likely to make fewer than the 5 possible substitutions, 2 of which were bound to be Lanzini and Anderson. Overall, it might have been a slight improvement performance-wise on the Wolves match, but not to the extent that you could view that improvement with anything other than the most powerful of electron microscopes. Of course, we wouldn't need such high-powered stuff where we'd be able to be treated with some more tangible evidence of improvement, like a goal. In the meantime, it's goal difference, and in the case of the form of those around us, goal indifference, which is all that's keeping us up at the moment. Injury news is that Haller, who seems simultaneously to be both the cause of and the solution to all our current ills, is unlikely to make this one, his hip/groin restricting his training time. Similarly, Snodgrass's disc problem will also preclude his appearance. Masuaku is supposedly near to a return to availability, though for some reason I can't quite bring myself to get too excited by the prospect. I suppose we'd better move on to the prediction then. Well, if and when we go 1-0 down, that will pretty much be it. And I can't see us not going 1-0 down. People have bemoaned the absence of a key striker, which is wrong. It's the absence of any striker that will cost us up the other end. Sorry people, but I can't see anything other than another setback here, so please Mr. Winston, take the £2.50 that I was going to purchase an asterisk with as a present for the new champions, and place the money on a 3-0 away win. Enjoy the game, and remember you can read this version plus Percy's Poser on kumb.com.